The call came in at 9:42 a.m. on April 24th, 2022. A friend couldn't reach Britney Booker. Her kids were home, alone. The door was locked from the outside. Her phone was off. Her car, still parked across the street, but Britney was gone. Racine, Wisconsin wasn't the kind of place where mothers vanished overnight. It wasn't the kind of town where police opened a missing persons case before lunch and escalated it to a homicide scene by sundown. The responding officer noted nothing out of place inside the Booker home. 6 children aged between 4 and 13, all accounted for. No signs of a break-in, no struggle, no screaming reported, just a single mother who got up early that morning and never returned. Her purse was missing, her shoes weren't. That detail alone drew attention. A canvass of the block began before noon. A neighbor on the opposite end of Villa Street mentioned seeing her step outside around 4:30 a.m., heading toward her car in a hoodie. It wasn't unusual, she said. Britney sometimes worked early cleaning shifts at nearby clinics, but this time she didn't drive off. No engine sound, just quiet. By 2 p.m., officers located her white Chevy Impala parked near 13th and Center Street, 3 blocks from her home. The front passenger side window was cracked open an inch. No keys in the ignition. The vehicle was cold. Inside the car, slumped awkwardly into the front passenger seat, was a female body. She had been dead for several hours. A medical examiner arrived on scene at 2:47 p.m. The body matched Britney's description. Lividity had settled in her lower back and legs. There were visible signs of blunt force trauma to the head and what appeared to be a gunshot entry wound behind her left ear. No wallet, no ID, but the tattoos, one along her collarbone, another on her wrist, were known to family. It was her. The back seat was undisturbed. The car was unlocked. No signs of a violent struggle inside, just the victim's body and a trace amount of blood spatter near the driver's side armrest. No broken glass, no forced entry. One officer remarked, "If she fought back, it didn't happen here." Initial forensic priority: determine cause of death, establish time of death, recover latent prints, and trace evidence from the interior. Crime scene techs performed a swab of the steering wheel, gear shift, the interior door handles, and window switches. A pair of smudged prints, non-identifiable, were pulled from the inside of the passenger window. A partial palm print was lifted from the roof of the car above the front seat. There was no sign of the murder weapon. When the vehicle was towed to the department's forensic bay, analysis began with UV scanning and ALS, alternate light source detection. Trace fiber consistent with synthetic fleece was recovered from the front seatbelt clasp. A small piece of broken fingernail, possibly belonging to the victim, was logged. Digital analysis of the victim's phone, found on her kitchen counter, revealed the last outgoing text at 4:26 a.m. to an unsaved number. "I'll be out in 2." No response followed. That burner number was later traced to a prepaid device purchased in Illinois using cash. Surveillance footage from traffic cameras at 12th and Racine Avenue placed the Impala driving southbound around 4:39 a.m. A tall figure in a hoodie was seen in the driver's seat. The footage was grainy. No plates visible. No other vehicles within range for tracking. Autopsy was initiated the following morning. Cause of death: blunt force trauma in a single contact gunshot wound to the base of the skull. Manner of death: homicide. Toxicology revealed no sedatives in Britney's system, no signs of sexual assault. The ME's summary suggested the victim was conscious and upright at time of attack. She died within minutes. Detectives began constructing a victimology profile. Britney Booker, 30, single mother of 6, part-time custodial worker. No known criminal history, no recent complaints. But her name wasn't unfamiliar at the station. 2 months earlier, she had survived a violent assault with a blunt object. The attacker hadn't been arrested. He disappeared before charges could be filed. A notation in that report stood out. Victim agreed to testify. Subject issued open felony warrant. Investigators knew one thing for certain. Whoever had killed Britney Booker had followed up on unfinished business. And he'd done it quietly, efficiently, with minimal trace. One detective phrased it this way: "There's a difference between rage and resolve." This was resolved. On February 27, 2022, Racine Dispatch received a 911 call just after 5 a.m. Two women had reportedly been attacked inside a residence on Lathrop Avenue. The caller, wounded but conscious, stated they had been ambushed by a man with a hammer. The second woman was Britney Booker. When officers arrived, they found both women outside the house. One had visible head trauma. The other, a friend of Britney's, had blood on her sweatshirt and abrasions on her arms. An ambulance was already en route. Neither woman could provide a full account at the scene, but both identified the suspect by name. Inside the residence, investigators documented signs of forced re-entry. A rear basement window had been shattered from the outside. The suspect had apparently entered through the basement and waited. A claw hammer was recovered near the stairwell. Bloodied, no latent prints, no gloves recovered. Analysis later confirmed the DNA on the handle matched both victims. The assault had been premeditated. There was no evidence of burglary or theft. The target wasn't the house, it was them. Britney was interviewed under sedation at the hospital. She stated she and her friend had gone to the property to collect belongings. The suspect had previously lived there, but was no longer supposed to have access. There were no restraining orders in place. Britney confirmed she had not been involved in any relationship with him, but had been encouraging her friend to leave. She was trying to cut him off, Britney said, and he lost it. Doctors noted a scalp laceration requiring 6 staples and a possible concussion. Britney declined overnight observation and left the hospital that same evening. The suspect disappeared within hours of the assault. Warrants were signed the next morning for felony battery, use of a dangerous weapon, and first-degree recklessly endangering safety. Attempts to locate him over the following week failed. Cell tower pings placed his device near Kenosha, then Chicago. After that, nothing. A detective reviewing the file made a notation. Victim is cooperative but visibly anxious. Requested updates on warrant status? Said she feared he might come finish it. Due to backlog, the warrant wasn't flagged for federal assistance until weeks later. Meanwhile, Britney resumed work. She declined victim relocation or safe house offers. Friends later said she was trying to maintain normalcy for her kids. She wanted to testify, one said, but she also needed to feed 6 mouths and couldn't just disappear. A forensic re-review of the hammer attack scene showed a second disturbing detail. The attacker had placed tape over the motion sensors in the basement, indicating familiarity with the layout and forethought. Detectives debated whether this detail should be disclosed publicly. It wasn't. Forensic sequencing logged it under Staging Behaviors, Phase 1. One analyst phrased it clearly in a private memo. The February assault wasn't impulsive, it was a first attempt. From the outside, Britney Booker's life in March 2022 appeared intact. She returned to work within 2 weeks of the February assault, resumed her normal hours, and brought her youngest children back to daycare. Neighbors saw her watering the small patch of grass in front of her duplex. But investigators reviewing her case would later note that this period, what they called the calm window, was neither calm nor unremarkable. Internal memos from Racine PD indicate that by March 10th, the suspect in the hammer assault was still at large. His warrant, although entered into the state system, had not yet been flagged at the national level. A recommendation to escalate it for federal apprehension was made, but it sat unprocessed for 12 days. Meanwhile, Britney had become a public symbol of survival, recognized quietly within her community for helping her friend escape a violent relationship. That status made her both visible and vulnerable. The district's victim risk management matrix placed her in Tier 3, likely to face indirect threat within 90 days. The designation triggered a standard review, but did not guarantee any protective action unless an imminent danger could be established. On March 13th, her mother contacted law enforcement with an informal concern. Britney believed someone had been watching her house at night. She had heard car doors closing between 3 and 4 a.m., footsteps along the side of the house, and once noticed cigarette butts near the trash bins, despite being a non-smoker. Officers conducted a brief drive-by that evening, but reported no unusual findings. The incident was logged as a precautionary inquiry, not a formal report. A week later, a private security system installed on a neighbor's garage captured footage of a white sedan idling without headlights on at 4:22 a.m., parked near Britney's property line. The footage showed the car pulling up, pausing, and then driving away 18 minutes later. The license plate was partially obscured with a plastic grocery bag taped over the upper digits. No action was taken at the time. The footage wasn't reviewed until after Britney's death. That vehicle, later confirmed to be a 2011 Dodge Avenger registered under a fictitious name, would become the cornerstone of the digital trail investigators reconstructed. Forensic sequencing of neighborhood digital records between March 15th and April 22nd revealed a repeating pattern. The same sedan appeared in the area 4 times, always between 4 and 5 a.m., always parked near Britney's driveway, engine idling, lights off, always gone before sunrise. In at least 2 instances, a nearby cell tower registered brief pings from a prepaid phone, untraceable to any known user, but matching the same number Britney texted on the morning she was killed. This device, referred to as Device Delta, would later be linked to only 5 total towers over a 2-month span. Each ping occurred near Britney's work or home. A joint team from the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation and the Racine County Sheriff's Office conducted a layered time-spatial analysis. They mapped Device Delta's signal intervals with the Avenger's known location points. The results were described by one agent as mathematically consistent with pre-attack patterning. The car wasn't casing the neighborhood. It was casing her. At the same time, Britney's behavior shifted incrementally. She stopped attending evening gatherings. She declined 2 church events she normally participated in. She spoke less on the phone. She bought blackout curtains. When asked about her change, she simply told a friend, "I've got a lot on my mind." She never called the police herself, not once. The lead investigator later wrote, "She was calibrating for danger, but she didn't want to seem like she was living in fear." At the forensic level, those weeks became vital for what wasn't recorded. No physical damage, no overt threats, no contact, just presence. That absence of action wasn't seen as safety, it was discipline. The suspect hadn't vanished, he had gone silent. A social services worker assigned to Britney's household made a routine welfare visit on April 5th. Notes from that visit, later subpoenaed in court, read, "Client appears aware of ongoing threat, refused relocation resources. States, if something happens, just make sure my babies are okay." That sentence became a turning point. The investigating team reevaluated their operational threshold for deploying resources. But by April 12th, no new activity had been reported. Then on April 13th, a final signal from Device Delta was recorded just 6 blocks from Britney's residence. The phone remained active for 6 minutes and 43 seconds. No outbound communication was made. The tower triangulation placed it within 400 feet of her driveway. No calls came in. No arrests were made. No alert went out. The system required action to be triggered by violence. And violence hadn't happened yet. What Racine investigators would learn too late is that by mid-April, the prelude was over. The planning had been completed. The pattern wasn't emerging anymore. It was closing. The white 2011 Dodge Avenger was located on May 22, 2022, roughly 4 weeks after Britney Booker's body was found. The vehicle had been parked behind a shuttered apartment complex in Chicago, Illinois, covered in pollen, caked in dust, and positioned deliberately behind a collapsed fence line where visibility was limited. It hadn't been moved in days. A tip from a former associate of the suspect led authorities to it. When the vehicle was impounded and transported to a controlled forensic facility in Racine, the initial inspection checklist emphasized 3 objectives. Identify trace evidence consistent with the Booker homicide. Determine any efforts at forensic concealment. Assess the timeline of vehicle use post-homicide. Examination began at 07:18 hours the following morning. Technicians used ALS, alternate light source, scanning on all interior surfaces. No visible blood pools were found. However, under blue light, faint microsplatter was detected on the underside of the front passenger seat. A presumptive blood test returned positive. The stain had partially been wiped but not neutralized chemically, indicating a hasty, non-professional attempt at cleanup. Swabs were taken from the steering wheel, door handles, gear shift, and rearview mirror. Latent fingerprints were smudged beyond comparison, suggesting they had been deliberately wiped. However, a partial palm print was lifted from the inside of the rear passenger window, ultimately confirmed to match the suspect's known biometric data. The front passenger side carpet showed signs of compression and unusual fiber disturbance. Forensic vacuuming recovered several strands of long synthetic hair, consistent with the victim's hair profile. Additionally, technicians located fragments of clear packaging tape adhered beneath the glove compartment. Residue analysis showed minor traces of nitrile, typically used in disposable gloves. What drew particular attention, however, was the HVAC filter inside the dashboard. It was visibly clogged with loose black fibers. When examined under microscope, the fibers were confirmed as polyester, matching the composition of the hoodie Britney was last seen wearing. Investigators noted the significance. For the particles to travel into the air system, the blower must have been running during or after the physical interaction, suggesting the victim was likely inside the vehicle when the assault occurred. Technicians also examined the exterior paneling. Soil residue on the wheel wells matched samples from the lot where Britney's body was recovered, confirming the vehicle had been in that location on or around April 24th. More telling, the tire treads revealed wear patterns unique to uneven gravel driveways, matched precisely to the gravel seam bordering Booker's home. Inside the center console, authorities found a receipt folded into quarters. It was for a gas station purchase in Gary, Indiana, dated April 25th, one day after Britney's death. The timestamp, 5:42 a.m. It showed the purchase of a prepaid SIM card and $20 in fuel. Surveillance footage from that station, later pulled, captured the Avenger briefly but did not show the driver clearly. The trunk was empty but clean to an unnatural degree. Luminol tests revealed faint luminescence along the right interior wall and latch. Although degraded, one technician wrote in his report, "The bleach scent is faint but present. Paneling appears wiped down inconsistently. Cleaning was hurried." The absence of forensic material can be as informative as its presence. Investigators classified the scene as non-neutral. The suspect hadn't left it untouched, but hadn't been successful in sterilizing it either. It suggested urgency, likely on foot after disposal, no time for a full disassembly. Logistical analysis determined that the car's movement pattern, using public security footage, license plate scans, and tower logs, ceased completely by April 26th. From that point on, the vehicle was likely abandoned and never returned to. This would later support the theory that the suspect relocated using a secondary vehicle or aid from accomplices. Forensics also revealed a final anomaly. A paper parking citation wedged under the passenger side wiper blade, dated April 28th, issued by a local parking enforcement officer in Chicago. The ticket included GPS coordinates, 1 block from where the vehicle was eventually found. It confirmed the car had not moved for at least 3 days following the last verified activity. When detectives compiled the findings into a timeline matrix, the conclusion was unavoidable. The vehicle had been used in the commission of the homicide. The body had been transported inside. The killer had attempted to stage both timeline and location, but the physical evidence didn't fully cooperate. Behind every cleanup, there's an imprint of what someone was trying to erase. The Avenger told the story, even when its driver tried not to. After the discovery of Britney Booker's body, the warrant on the primary suspect was escalated to federal priority. Local agencies had exhausted leads. The vehicle had been found. The body had been autopsied, but the man himself had vanished. 4 months passed. No credit card use, no verified sightings, no digital footprint. The phone number linked to the final text never reconnected to any cell network. The assumption was intentional shutdown. Authorities were dealing with someone who knew how to disappear, someone with help. The Racine County Sheriff's Office initiated coordination with the U.S. Marshals Service Fugitive Task Force. Initial briefings outlined a pattern of behavior consistent with transient movement across Midwestern states. A review of license plate recognition systems pulled one partial hit on a vehicle used by an associate of the suspect, recorded entering Gary, Indiana, 12 days after the homicide. There were no matching exit logs. The trail ran cold again. By June, agents began interviewing secondary subjects, friends, distant relatives, former co-workers. Most denied recent contact. A few cooperated minimally. But in July, a break came from a phone tap authorized on a known associate, female, early 30s, 2 prior misdemeanors, previously in a relationship with the suspect. One outbound call placed from her prepaid device caught attention. In it, she mentioned dropping something off in the West Englewood area of Chicago and used the phrase, "he still ain't got a real ID." That triggered a new surveillance directive. Over the next 3 weeks, agents tracked her movements. On August 14th, she was seen entering a corner unit on the second floor of a decaying apartment building. The unit had no registered tenant. Power was being siphoned from a neighboring line. Thermal imaging confirmed someone inside. The marshals executed the warrant on August 21st. The suspect was found sleeping on a mattress in the far back room. A 9mm pistol was recovered beneath a pile of clothes. He was taken into custody without resistance. Inside the unit, agents found items that hadn't been seen since April. An old phone with the back removed, a SIM card taped beneath a drawer, and a notebook containing first names, bus routes, and city maps. Several entries had Britney's name scribbled in different variations. One note read simply, "Racine, silence, return." Authorities believe he had planned to re-enter the area once pressure decreased. The delay in federal escalation may have bought him time, but not immunity. In post-arrest interviews, the suspect declined to speak. No confession, no denials, just silence. But silence doesn't erase evidence. By then, investigators had built a chain: vehicle, fiber, cell tower data, partial prints, receipts, surveillance timestamps. And now custody. Some cases collapse under a lack of proof. This one had too much to ignore. Within 48 hours of the suspect's arrest in Chicago, he was extradited back to Racine County under armed escort. He was held without bond at the county detention facility. The state filed formal charges on August 23, 2022, 23 counts in total. The primary charge, first-degree intentional homicide. The charging documents detailed a timeline anchored in forensic sequence, vehicle trace, location data, cell phone tower pings, DNA recovery, and physical evidence from the apartment and vehicle. The narrative submitted to the court was straightforward in its structure, but exhaustive in its detail. There was no single smoking gun, just a latticework of physical and digital proof, layered to the point of undeniability. The prosecution's case strategy focused on 3 pillars: premeditation, established through pattern surveillance, recorded casing behaviors, and recovered maps noting victim movement; opportunity and access, reinforced by GPS data and the suspect's known proximity to the crime scene window; consciousness of guilt, proven by flight, concealment tactics, altered identity documents, and selective deletion of digital records. The state's brief argued that the suspect had acted with calculation, not impulse, that he'd studied her schedule, that he'd returned to Racine for the express purpose of silencing a witness. During arraignment, the defendant pled not guilty. A public defender was initially assigned, then replaced by private counsel within 2 weeks, funded through undisclosed means. The defense's early posture was procedural: challenge the warrant, question the chain of custody, suppress the vehicle search. A motion hearing was scheduled to assess the admissibility of key evidence, particularly the gas station receipt, the SIM card, and the glove fibers recovered in the Dodge Avenger. Prosecutors responded with lab verification logs, unbroken storage records, and sworn deposition from the forensic examiners. The judge denied the suppression request. In parallel, the prosecution filed an aggravator under Wisconsin statute, seeking a life sentence without eligibility for supervised release. The aggravator cited the fact that the murder was committed to prevent testimony in a pending felony case. This legal move changed the tone of the proceedings. The defense narrowed focus. Instead of contesting every detail, their new goal was to frame the narrative as a crime of circumstance, not a calculated act of silencing. They leaned into instability, mental state, stress, but the paper trail worked against them. One entry in particular undermined that position: a note recovered from the apartment, written in block letters on the back of an envelope. It read, "Can't let her talk." Below that, "Do it early." This was submitted under seal, later admitted during evidentiary review. A pretrial services report noted no indication of psychiatric impairment, no substance abuse history, no active delusions. Jail logs indicated the suspect maintained consistent behavior, withdrawn but compliant, no disciplinary infractions. He declined counseling services. In mid-October 2022, the court finalized a tentative trial date for February of the following year. Discovery continued in parallel. Witness subpoenas were issued. A special victim support liaison was assigned to Britney Booker's family. Her children remained under family guardianship, and her eldest daughter was identified as a possible victim impact speaker during sentencing. A prosecutor later said, off record, "We're not just building a case, we're protecting the integrity of someone who tried to do the right thing and paid for it." The legal phase had begun, not with spectacle but with structure. Jury selection began on February 6, 2023, inside Racine County Circuit Court. Over 60 potential jurors were screened across 3 days. A final panel of 12, 8 women and 4 men, was seated. None had personal ties to the Booker family or law enforcement. All had heard of the case, but none had been exposed to unreleased evidence. The trial commenced on February 9th. Opening statements from the prosecution were methodical, not theatrical. Lead prosecutor Kimberly Nelson outlined the state's case in procedural terms: motive, timeline, premeditation, and forensic verification. She emphasized the calculated nature of the crime, its precision, not its passion. The defense followed with a reduced scope theory: no alternate suspect, no denial of Britney's death. Their position centered on mental instability, disorganized behavior, and lack of intent. It was a strategy designed to avoid a life without parole verdict, not to claim innocence. The state called 36 witnesses over 7 days. Forensic specialists led the early sequence: crime scene techs, lab analysts, digital investigators. The testimony was technical but clear. A crime lab examiner described the recovered fibers from the car HVAC system, explaining how air circulation moved hair and fabric fragments into vents and filters, and how those matched Britney's known apparel. Another analyst walked the jury through SIM card metadata: when the card was activated, how it connected to a specific tower near Booker's home on April 24th, and how the same number received her last text. Detective Adam Krause, who led the vehicle forensics, testified about bleach residue, partial prints, and trace evidence consistent with the victim's hair and blood. He was asked under oath if the evidence was consistent with post-murder concealment. He answered, "Yes. Every indication suggests the vehicle was used after the act, not before." Cross-examinations by the defense focused on contamination risk, error margins in trace analysis, and assumptions in behavior modeling. But the material chain, logs, tags, timestamps, held under scrutiny. The most emotionally difficult testimony came from Britney's friend, the woman assaulted alongside her in February 2022. She spoke calmly. She confirmed the earlier attack, the suspect's threats, and Britney's decision to report the incident instead of retreating. The courtroom remained silent throughout her account. The prosecution entered into evidence the handwritten note found in the Chicago apartment. "Can't let her talk." The defense objected to interpretation, but the judge allowed submission based on handwriting analysis and contextual relevance. By day 8, the prosecution rested. The defense called only 3 witnesses. A clinical psychologist testified to elevated stress indicators in the suspect's recorded jail interviews. The expert did not claim mental incompetence but cited possible disassociation and paranoid coping mechanisms. No mental illness diagnosis was formally entered. Closing arguments began February 17. The prosecution summarized the pattern: preparation, execution, concealment, and evasion. They reminded the jury of Britney's role, not just as a victim, but as a cooperating witness. Her murder, they argued, was not only an act of violence, but a disruption of justice itself. The defense reiterated lack of direct video, lack of confession, and suggested the state overinterpreted behavior as proof of intent. Their tone was restrained. Their goal: avoid maximum sentencing. Deliberations began at 10:12 a.m. the next day. The verdict came back at 5:41 p.m. Guilty on all counts. No reaction from the defendant. No visible response. From the gallery, Britney's mother held her daughter's oldest child, now 12. There were no cheers, just quiet. Some stories don't end with closure, but they do end with clarity. On March 7, 2023, the court reconvened for sentencing. The jury's verdict had been unanimous. The law now required the court to consider whether parole eligibility would apply, and if mitigating factors existed that could lessen the sentence. Neither emerged. The prosecution argued for the maximum, not out of vengeance, but out of precedent. A witness in an open felony case had been executed, silenced before she could testify. This, they said, wasn't only murder. It was obstruction of justice carried out with premeditated precision. In Wisconsin, the statute allowed for life imprisonment with or without extended supervision. The state pushed for without. The defense offered a brief closing. No apologies, no new arguments. Their client chose not to speak. The judge delivered the sentence in less than 15 minutes. Life without parole, no eligibility for release, no appeals granted on evidentiary grounds. The decision was final. There was no outburst in court, no visible emotion from the defendant. He remained still, as he had throughout most of the trial. The handcuffs clicked. The guards let him out. It ended in silence. Before court adjourned, Britney's eldest daughter was permitted to read a victim impact statement. She did not cry. She read clearly, calmly. She spoke of watching her siblings grow up without a mother, of birthdays missed, of questions she couldn't answer. She ended with one line, "You didn't just take her, you took what she was protecting." That line stayed with the courtroom. The record reflected it in full. After sentencing, the Booker family declined most media contact. They issued a brief written statement expressing relief that the legal process had finished, but underlining that justice does not equal healing. Britney's mother later said in a local interview that her daughter's strength had become too easy to forget in the middle of procedures, charges, and headlines. In the months following the trial, the city of Racine held a community forum on domestic violence and witness protection. Not everyone agreed on what should have been done differently, but few denied that something had been missed. There was discussion at the county level about emergency response protocols when stalking indicators are present, especially for named witnesses in felony-level cases. Britney's case became a reference point in several internal law enforcement trainings. A small scholarship fund was established in her name by a nonprofit assisting children affected by violent loss. The application criteria were simple: resilience, caretaking, community service. The first award was granted in the fall of 2023. Britney's story didn't lead to sweeping legislative reform, but it remained a name that surfaced in quiet ways, on officer training slides, in victim advocate seminars, in hallway conversations where someone asked, "Do we have another Britney Booker situation?" Sometimes the most lasting legacy isn't legal, it's procedural, a shift in who pays attention and when. She wasn't famous. She didn't hold office, but she took a risk others wouldn't. She stood between a violent man and another woman who wanted out, and for that, she became a target. Her death was preventable, her resolve unshaken. That contradiction still lingers. In the end, the court didn't just convict a man. It documented a pattern, a system too slow to respond, a woman too brave to wait. Justice arrived too late, but it arrived. And in a world where silence often feels safer, she didn't choose it. In the end, Britney's story isn't just about loss, it's about choice. She chose to speak up when it was safer to stay silent. She chose to protect someone else even when no one could guarantee her safety. And for that, her courage becomes a lesson we all carry. If you've ever felt like your voice doesn't matter, remember Britney, it does. Speak up, protect those who can't, and demand systems that respond before it's too late. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think enough is being done to protect witnesses in high-risk cases? Have you or someone you know ever been failed by the system? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might help someone else feel seen. If this story moved you or made you think, tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't connect with you, I'd still love to know why. Your feedback helps us grow. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next story that just might change how you see the world.